So, welcome everybody. How's everyone doing? I hope good. I'm not going to unmute you so you can answer, but thumbs up works. Yeah, good. Exciting, exciting. Thank you all for being here. I'm very, very excited to see some friendly faces, some long lost faces, some not so long lost faces, friends of friends, parents, all that. Thank you all for coming, and I'm really excited to be able to be here and share this with y'all. And it's really, really meaningful for me that everybody decided to take the time out of their day to actually dedicate some time to learning and listening and being a part of the conversation in a productive manner rather than just shouting into the echo chamber like we discussed the last time. If y'all remember, special shout out, thank you to all of you who came to the last one. Reminder that recording is on YouTube. This one will be recorded straight to a Zoom link, so then anybody who watches it after should be able to see the chat as well. And then I also wanted to just preface this entire meeting by with maybe a suggestion about where your head should be at, what we're doing today, and what we're trying to really get out of this conversation right now. So today, as all of you know, we're going to talk about microaggressions, aggressions, and the N-word. The agenda kind of is as follows. So I'm going to say a few things, and then I'm going to let one of our very special guests, Lazeric Banks, take over. He is a culture specialist at USC, and I'll let him tell you what that means. But he's worked in corporate America in equity and diversity inclusion initiatives, and he's done some really great work in this space. So thank you to him for being here and sharing his insights with us. And then we got a couple of questions for him. If our other panelists do make an appearance, we'll do some of that. And then it's going to transition more into, like we had last time, a reflection and sharing kind of period where we're going to have another guest of ours. Bryce is going to speak a little bit on his experience, and then that's going to kind of segue into a larger discussion about what y'all can be doing as people who are just trying to join the fight, recognizing the error of past ways, reconciling with that in yourself, so as to leave all that prejudice behind as you move forward. So does that all make sense? Let's get a nod. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so I am just going to say a couple of things just real quick. So when we talk about the culture of suppression and the culture of oppression in this country, it's a very specific thing that we're talking about, right? It's not this intangible floating in the air, sometimes we feel it, sometimes we don't. No, it's a system. It's an active system that is actively working to keep people down, that it wants to keep down, or lift people up that it wants to lift up, which is really, really unfortunate, right? And if we think about it, it all began, every hateful action that has happened against, Black Americans has been fueled by the same culture of oppression, culture of suppression that was established, with the birth of slavery, right? With the slave trade coming to Americas, right? Where prisoners were taken and used for forced labor, all that. We all know the history books, but for some reason, there seems to be a disconnect where people think that, oh, that was 400, 500 years ago. That must be a different thing. It's a different time. It's a time lost, time removed. No. It is fully the same forces. It is the same forces manifested in slightly different ways. The N-word, the policing system, the microaggressions that we talk about today are modern manifestations of this same hate that was harbored by slave owners, slave traders, policemen of back in the day that were tasked with hunting down Black people with dogs. All of that is to say that we have to understand and recognize that history is not so far away. That history is not gone. That history is not lost. And it's still relevant today because, frankly, if we look at Black America today, we're still being enslaved. African-American prisoners who are convicted of murder are 50% more likely to be innocent than other convicted murderers and spend longer in prison before being exonerated than non-Black people who were exonerated. That was a study by Michigan State, which is actually really important because Michigan and Detroit specifically is one of the most segregated cities that had one of the most severe problems with police brutality and violence. And once they're in prison, they're forced to work for free and make goods that are actually sold at a profit. And I don't know about you guys, but to me, that sounds like slavery, right? And then when they leave, they get out of that system, if they do make it out of that system, they're met with a world filled with people who don't respect them, who don't give them the benefit of the doubt, who don't give them the opportunities, who not only don't do any of those things, but actively work, whether they know it or not, to suppress those people, to oppress those people, to not show those people the respect that they deserve. Because our worth should not be determined by a mistake that was made 20 some odd years ago that wouldn't even be considered a crime now, which is the craziest part. All of that is to say that the same hate that dominated 500 years ago dominates today. And I'm going to let Lazeric take over and talk a little bit about how microaggressions, the idea behind microaggressions, what are they? How do they affect us in society? Well, I'll let him introduce himself first, talk a little bit about him, and then let him take it away.
You're muted a little bit.
I was totally muted. Thank you for noticing, else I would have went on and on. And so thank you for having me today, Marcus. And so, as Marcus said, I'll be speaking with you today about microaggressions. And I want to walk you through it from how I typically have seen it in the workforce, and just bring some context around how microaggressions is so important and really the root cause of it. And so microaggressions, by definition, is defined as brief or common verbal, daily, behavioral, environmental communications, whether intentional or intentional, hostile, derogatory, and negative messages to a target group. And so that definition does include intentional, but I usually like to look at it as something to where it's unintentional, you're not cognizant of it. Blatant discrimination does exist, so does blatant disrespect, but usually when it comes to microaggression, I'm looking at it as something to where it's more of a form of unconscious bias. And so when you talk about microaggressions, I think it's best actually to take a look at the different forms that it comes in, especially in terms of bias. And so when you think about bias, you have conscious bias as well as unconscious bias. Conscious bias is easier to see and detect because if you're willing to take the time to actually look at it and have some space to process those behaviors, it's pretty easy to know that, wow, you're actually committing an act of discrimination with that. That's usually not the case with unconscious bias. So as a control center of our brain, as a control center of our body, our brain has so many functions to perform. It cannot consciously interpret and make decisions on all the information that it takes in while performing other bodily functions. So shortcuts in the brain must take place, which often result in unconscious bias there. The process for resocialization and addressing unconscious bias is a much larger process than you get with conscious bias. It requires more targeted efforts at undoing long-held beliefs that may be the result of your upbringing, ignorance, ideologies, language, or whatever was tolerated with where you were from. Both conscious and unconscious bias start as microaggressions that become systematic when unchecked. So at the same time, usually when you discuss unconscious bias, it's important to have a good grasp of how ideas of privilege and also nepotism can be harmful, like microaggressions against the Black community. And so privilege, especially from a cultural standpoint, is defined as a special right, advantage, or immunity granted only to a person or group, most commonly members of a dominant cultural group. Depending on how you impact it, your view and recognition of privilege can be different or even non-existent. As with bias, recognizing privilege does take a certain level of awareness. Privilege has been a term used a lot during the Black Lives Matter movement to highlight discrepancies in interactions and experiences from similarly faced situations, occurrences, and discrepancies in interactions experienced from similarly faced occurrences. It could be the reason why some people may take a longer time to actually grasp what Black Lives Matter actually means and understand why a term like all life matters is harmful and ignores what the Black Lives Matter movement stands for, which is a fight for equity and justice. Nepotism can be looked at as the benefits of controlled resources granted to someone in any capacity. Aid from nepotism is not something that everybody actually gets. Nepotism actually creates inequalities, and it's produced because people actually like to help people that look like me. It's the people who live in your neighborhood, the people that attend the churches you live in, the people that go to your school if you worked with in the past. And so when you think about the manifestation of microaggressions, privilege, and nepotism in a workplace, even if it's not something blatant or something done with malicious intent, it's just as harmful and as powerful to the Black community. So microaggressions, privilege, and nepotism hurt in two main ways: in gaining access to an organization who can facilitate acceptance into those with those organizational networks, and also for people looking to gain access to developmental relationships to enhance and grow your career. And so let me explain a little bit why this is so important. Since 1964 with Title VII, there's actually been laws against discrimination in hiring, both in promotion as well. And these laws clearly state that you can't discriminate against somebody or intentionally put barriers in place to actually impede their progress. But we actually know that discrimination still is taking place because there have been issues with Black representation, Black hiring, Black promotion, or even just the Black community feeling as if they're actually included and belong in the workplace. And then for people who are actually being discriminated against, especially when you consider acts like results of privilege, nepotism, and what people face with microaggressions, it's very hard sometimes to actually know that you're being discriminated against, when exactly you're discriminated against, what you actually can do, and how to actually go about fixing these situations. And when you're dealing with microaggressions, especially considering that they're acts of unconscious bias a lot of times, sometimes because people have been so programmed because of their upbringing, their socialization, they don't even actually know that they're engaged in it, which is a much bigger problem than people who actually are intentionally discriminating against people. And so you could think of like what microaggressions cause is something called desperate treatment. And so it's something that doesn't have to be intentional and often the result of unconscious bias, but still actually does hurt people, especially the Black community. Probably the most typical form of desperate treatment is desperate impact, which is when a standard is applied to a group equally, but the standard actually favors one group disproportionately over another. And so that's the reason why it's so dangerous. Routinely, Blacks are frustrated and have detailed accounts of the indignities that they face, how they've been passed up for opportunities, work that they've not been credited for that they perform, often talked over, or have faced or had to sit through jokes and statements that have been very hurtful and amount to basically harassment in their working place in the organization. And even then, from this being tolerated because of these microaggressions and how they become systemic, it's something to where a lot of distrust develops in the Black community and the workforce, to where they don't trust HR, human resources. They don't trust going to their leaders because they feel as if there's not going to get the result that they want out of this. Similar to how a lot of Blacks may not want to actually call the police when there's a matter because they feel as if the police are actually going to make the matters worse, or they're even going to lose their life as a result of calling the police to a situation. And so diversity and inclusion are very important for a healthy culture, and representation matters. And representation actually is something that is a reason why you might see a decline in microaggressions, because there are people who think more broadly, people that can actually bring more perspective to the conversation, and actually can tell people that, hey, this doesn't feel right, or to help people from an educational standpoint understand why a statement may not be right, or why you can't treat people a certain way. An example might be back in 2017, I decided to change my appearance with how I grew my hair. I know that it was something to where, because microaggressions actually exist, that people may look at me and not accept me, or to think that I might not be a fit from a cultural standpoint. But it was a risk that I thought that I had to take. California actually started with the Crown Act, which says that you can't discriminate against somebody based upon their looks. But we do know, just because of Title VII back in 1964, just because you actually have a legislation in place that says that something can't happen, that things haven't, because of systemic discrimination still don't actually exist, which is a reason why you need an inclusive, diverse, and an organization high in belonging to actually make legislation and those type of acts actually mean something. So this time, why might it actually be different, and why might we actually see changes with microaggressions? Well, I think it's because of the movement that we're seeing right now and the uprising going on. And so we know that opportunity costs due to not securing the best talent, and also the purchasing power of the Black community, are very real things. A few years ago, McKinsey did a study that said that An organization 35% organization can be 35% more successful in their industry than other organizations when they have high representation racially and ethnically. This is because creativity and innovation can bring a lot of different opportunities as a result of investing in your people, giving them support, giving them the resources they succeed, and also a platform to actually drive strategy. When properly represented and feel a high level of education, engagement, and belonging, we know that the Black community is very capable of great things. Hostile work environments due to blatant acts of aggressions, with microaggressions being a lead and a cause, have created hostile environments that have historically limited the Black community and changed how they're actually judged and how they are measured and evaluated compared to their peers. But we've seen recently how the power of connectedness, the power of social media can help bring attention to these discriminations and give people actually a voice that they didn't have before. With the uprising going on, we see that when there's not actually support for the Black community, when there's not a place and safe place for them to exist and they don't feel valued, this is something that we can bring attention to and bring awareness to, and we don't have to give our dollars or energy to support them anymore. All right. And so just want to give you sort of the brief take of why microaggressions in a workplace might exist and why they're so important, and to give you some context around that. And turn it back over to you, Marcus.
Yeah, I actually have a couple. So I guess to turn that on its head, so we kind of established that microaggressions definitely exist, not only in the workplace, right, but in school environments and oftentimes just in public, if you're at a store or shopping or something like that, right? It could be with anybody, and it could be at any given moment, you know, some sort of internal bias could inflict some sort of damage on a person. And that is not necessarily to say that anybody who commits an act of a microaggression is a bad person for doing that. That's obviously not what we're saying. It just means that you have to be conscious of your internal bias. You have to be able to check that internal bias, you know, and make sure that you're making active decisions to not offend people, you know, and to learn when you do offend people, to stop and think about what you just did in that moment, you know, that offended that someone and why they might have been offended, you know, in or hurt by your actions, right? And I think that's fantastic, but I want to throw another question back at you. If you had to think about, right, you've worked at Kohler, if I'm not mistaken, right? Kohler and Allstate in their diversity and inclusion wings, right, in their department. So what was the model of diversity that you were trying to achieve, right? What is the model of diversity that these workplaces are trying to achieve? What does that actually look like, and how do we go about getting there?
Well, I think one of the ways that people actually sort of try to look at diversity is to be representative of all the different communities that you serve, and to make sure that your workforce is able to actually model the base of the communities in which you exist and which you wish to do business with. And so that's important, because if you're delivering a product that you want to sell something, you can't sell something to a community if you don't know what that community looks like. And while we know that people can think broadly from a number of different ways, unless you actually do have members of a community represented in your workforce, from levels of people actually doing the production themselves all the way up to the leader level, it's hard to actually think for and figure out what a community actually wants. And so that's the reason why you're trying to make sure that you have that type of representation and inclusion from all different type of communities and backgrounds in your organization.
And so what kind of processes, like what kind of steps did you implement, like in your time in these places, to try and tackle some of these issues?
Well, from a couple of different approaches. And so one of the ways I looked at nationally was this talent acquisition, of how we're actually acquiring people from diverse backgrounds. And so it's hard to actually know until you hire a person, you give them on board that you've selected diverse talent. So from a strategy standpoint, you're trying to make sure you're doing things to attract people from diverse backgrounds to actually apply. And so that's making sure you're represented at different school fairs that you go to, different job fairs, different networking events, and being able to show people what exactly you have at your organization that makes people feel that they have a place to exist. That's one way. Once actually people get into the organizations, I focused a lot on talent management processes, as well as what can we do to actually create more inclusive environments and also environments high in belonging. And so from the process of talent management, making sure we have good and objective ways inside of our process to actually evaluate talent, because we know sort of the plights of microaggressions to where people aren't always in situations that allow them to exist at their best because they might be facing sort of those microaggressions from people they interact with that distract them and take them away from their ability to fully work. We may not be in positions to where managers and leaders are used to working with diverse people from different backgrounds, so they may not have a high understanding of working with people from a cultural context, which may also create additional macroaggressions from their background. And so just providing a lot of education in that space around unconscious bias training, leading in diverse teams, and also creating environments high in belonging so that you people can perform their best. And another thing I actually worked a lot with was employee resource groups. And so giving people avenues that they feel that they can belong and be them full themselves, because while we still want to make sure that we have very inclusive environments, we still know that especially when it comes to diverse organizations in the Black community, there are a lot of different unique situations that they face, and the idea of camaraderie and community by seeing people that go through the same thing that you do, who look the same way as you do, who come from the same backgrounds with you, having an avenue that you can connect with them and to help perform and exist in the organization does a great thing for performance and innovation.
For sure. Yeah, all of that makes a lot of sense. So I guess my follow-up question to that would be, let's say you're in a workplace. So I know we have a lot of people here who have just graduated university, right? They're entering these workplaces, and it can be very intimidating as a young person in a workplace to try and step up and step out and use your voice, right? To stop these things from happening, right? So what would be your advice to anybody who's about to enter a workplace, right? That may be white dominated or may not be a place that lets every single person, be their full entire selves. What would you say to these people that are trying to approach that situation, right? And how would you help them and, speak up in that situation? What would you say would be a good thing for them to say?
Well, one of the things I always recommend people to do is to research and really get to understand the organization that you're there and find ways that help you connect naturally. And so think about all aspects of your identity and to look at where there might be an avenue for that in that organization. And so I think that's one of the most important things, because your identity and who you are isn't just what people can naturally actually see from you. And so organizations are looking to actually do a lot now to enable the person to be them full selves, to where whether it's something you care about from a community standpoint, if it's something that you care about helping succeed from a sustainability standpoint, they're usually things from that. A lot of organizations, business resource groups, and so if there's a demographic that you're potentially into doing more things to support, or even just to learn more about, there might be a resource group there for that. And so finding and connecting to those things usually allows you to connect with other people and make easier introductions to help yourself grow from a career. And so by approaching people and finding different things that you both care about and passionate about, it's much easier to translate to something to help and grow your career.
I think that's a really great point that you had, and the idea that finding common ground before you address any of those issues, right? Finding common ground, even with other people that you feel are excluding other people, right? So that you can have some sort of connection across these different barriers, right? But that's difficult, right? That's a difficult process. So I guess I wonder, what is the best way? What ways have you found, to be super helpful in building those community networks and trying to find, even in your daily life, is there anything that you do in particular? Do you go out of your way to make sure that you talk to everybody in your office every day? Do you go, those types of things?
Well, one of the things is I have to step out of my comfort zone because I'm a natural introvert, and sometimes it can be intimidating because even for myself, I'm not from California, and so not from the LA area, and so for me, I don't know many people here, and when I come to work, I don't have some of the same ties and same things that help me easily connect with somebody else. And so it's a big process, and really just stepping out of my comfort zone and finding different ways to actually be involved. And so it's one of the things to where you have to get up out of your seat, and you just can't keep your head down and to do your job and hope great things are going to happen to you. So where, yes, people may notice you because of your work, but people want to do more to help people that actually go out and help themselves. And part of that's just really just stepping out of your comfort zone. And so it could be something very intimidating. People may not always receive you the way that you're hoping for. They may be a little bit slow getting back to you. But it's just something that you have to stick with, because it's a part of growth, and you're not going to be able to actually expand your horizons and to have that success that you want to unless you get out there and put yourself out there and try.
I think that's a really great point. It's all about growth, is all about stepping out of that comfort zone, right? Everything comes with nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? But in those situations, you're definitely putting yourself in a vulnerable situation. I'm just thinking specifically, you're new to an office, right? You want to come off as friendly, you want to make a good first impression, but inevitably certain things, a lot of the time, if somebody feels a little bit uncomfortable in that situation, they may say something that's a little bit too off color, or their genuine intention to try and come off as friendly or accepting can come off as very almost pitiful, or, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, is this person talking to me, a tokenization or objectification, to that extent, right? So what would you say to a person, who's really just trying to reach that olive branch out to take that first step, who feels that they've offended somebody, how do they go about mending that relationship? What is the right thing to say there, or how should they be thinking about their actions?
Well, one of the things that I always recommend, especially in an organizational context, because there are so many different dynamics and there are so many different individuals, is to always assume positive intent. And so it's a practice to where even if I 100% may feel that a person might be coming off with genuine harm or malice, to assume that there's some sort of positive intent there and figure out how to navigate the circumstance from there. And so from there, asking probing questions, asking clarifying questions that help bring into context to understand and create some common ground to say that, I feel as if I may not be understanding where you're coming from, or I want to make sure I give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to go ahead and ask some questions and try to get some more context to understand what's going on, so that I understand how to proceed and how to actually make this the best interaction possible. And so usually when asking those type of questions and assuming a positive intent, even if a person did have some harm for what they said, it provides some sort of check to it into whether it was a microaggression or whether it was some sort of blatant discrimination, anything on that spectrum. They're asking those probing questions and digging deeper into it usually gives you more information to act upon, and it acts as a check to them for them to understand that, hey, what I said was inappropriate, what I did was inappropriate. How do I actually myself now proceed to make better with the situation?
I think those are all fantastic points. Thank you. I think that's great advice for anybody, right? Ask questions before making a judgment, right? Before you come to your final conclusion, continue to ask, right? And continue to ask it not from a jaded place of judgment, right? Already, but completely open to whatever the answer may be, process that information, and then understand what that person was really trying to say. And if you still don't understand, continue asking questions, and hopefully you'll eventually find a space. And even if not, that person should respect you so much more for not jumping to a conclusion, for not jumping to that final, oh, I'm just going to blow this off because I feel that this person came off in a very aggressive way, right? That's not what we want to do. When we approach every situation, we should approach it, right, with as much, honesty and humility as you can, and understand, right? And this is something that I actually want to say to everybody in the group, right? It's okay to not know things. It's okay to not understand things. Nobody knows everything, because none of us are God. And as simple or as dumb or as cliche as that may sound, right? People get very uncomfortable when they don't know things, or when they're in situations where they feel like they're the odd one out, right? Where they're not in the know. You know what I mean? And that can be very harmful in organizational settings where there's a group of people, who have some sort of commonality between them, and you as an outsider are trying to break into that group, or vice versa, right? Somebody is trying to break out of the group, out of their comfort zone, into this world unknown. It's really, really difficult to put that humility first, right? And say, I understand that I may not know everything that you might be talking about. I understand that I may not understand where you come from. I may not be able to empathize, right? But as long as you're willing to try your best and admit that you may not know something, you'll be able to learn. But if you're not willing to admit that you don't know something, then you can't learn that experience. You know, you can't use that experience as a learning experience because you never opened your mind to that possibility of learning, right? So that's the major first step that I really want to reiterate, is that you have to realize that there are things that you need to unlearn or that you don't know before you can learn that proper process, right? And it starts with everything Lazeric just said, right? Getting out of your comfort zone, asking questions before making a judgment, right? And having the knowledge, doing the research beforehand to know before you take that action, right? And I think those are all really, really fantastic. And actually, I just got a request. So maybe Lazeric, do you think you can work through a specific example of a microaggression, you know, in the workplace, and maybe different strategies to respond as a bystander or also as a you know, as a perpetrator?
Well, I guess one situation I could probably talk about, and I'll tie this to a couple of one, was I don't have the most common name to pronounce, and so I don't know too many Lazerics, and not many people see it, and so even if I tell people my name a lot of times, they still don't actually get it right all the time. And then coupled with that, I've actually been called by the name of someone else, to where another Black person, to where we might be the only two people that person interacts with. And again, thinking about the idea of microaggressions in a mind taking shortcuts to where they saw me as a Black person, automatically assume that I'm the only other Black person that they interacted with, and they call me those names. And so, you know, in both those cases, to where it's very easy for me to get frustrated, because I know that they're mispronouncing my name because they're not taking the time actually to pay attention to what I'm saying and to actually learn it, and to ingrain it into them that my name is actually Lazeric, not Lazeric or Lazarus or any other ones. And so in those situations to where that type of microaggression actually did happen, I let them know that, hey, my name is Lazeric. It's often mispronounced such and such. So it was a way for me to call them out, to say that, you know, the ways that I hear my name is pronounced, and to actually set them straight, and to let them know that it bothers me and I do notice it, and that they know to pay more attention to it to go from time on. And so that's how I've handled that situation when it happened. In situations to where when I've been called the name of another Black person, it's something to where I haven't always reacted the most positively at first. And it took me a little while to figure that out, because, you know, it did feel a little bit of a stronger of a microaggression, but understanding where that came from, I started doing things to where if I knew that person, I would actually start saying things to show the difference between that person and I, to let that person know that we're two distinct persons. So all reference work of saying that, oh yeah, you must have worked with such and such on this, and they're a great person to partner on. But you know, that may not be my particular area, but what I can do for you around this area is. And so again, it was just me taking steps to remind them that, hey, I'm an individual, I'm somebody else, I'm valued for this, and you should remember me. And that person is a great person too. And yes, you should continue to go to them for that support and work that you need. And so again, it's where when it comes to those type of microaggressions, you do your best to actually call things out, to let that person know that yes, it was a slight to you, and that it matters, and redirect them of how you want to be treated in the most courteous, professional ways possible.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess honestly, I would also encourage anybody who is curious about, you know, when am I saying the right thing? When am I saying the wrong thing? You know, there is no book. There is no official record of what you can and cannot say. Certain things will make certain people uncomfortable for various different reasons, right? You have to remember that nobody thinks the same. You know, nobody thinks it. Even if you agree with somebody on something, nobody thinks exactly the same, right? And you have to remember that, you know, something that might sound not offensive out of your mouth may be offensive to somebody else. But like at the end of the day, right, if you offend somebody, apologize in the moment. Just say you're sorry and say that I genuinely want to know why what I did was wrong. Please help me understand. And that person will generally be more than willing, you know, if you come from a place of humility to say like, hey, I'm really sorry that I offended you. I can see that you're visibly upset. and I want to help, tell me how I can help, right? Tell me why I was wrong. And then genuinely listen to that person, and then never make that mistake again. And it should never come up again, right? And that is how all these interactions should go. If you do feel like you have offended somebody, just check in with them as a person to person, out of common courtesy. Say, hey, I'm really sorry if I offended you, and I would really like some help about, understanding why this was wrong. So I encourage you all to take that stance, right? Don't just brush people off. Don't just assume that they were having a bad day, because they probably weren't, and you probably did say something. And so that's all I really have to say about that. I want to draw attention to Professor Schwartz's message in the chat. Check out Black in the Ivory to learn about many of the micro and very macroaggressions common in one type of workplace, particularly academia, which does bleed out into a lot of other things. And so that was actually a great segue into my next point. I want to really say that a lot of this information is online. A lot of these stories are online or on social media, right? If you search up different hashtags, if you really start to dig into, Black stories, and people are willing, in interviews of Black scholars and authors, Black celebrities everywhere, people are talking about these things, and I really want to help you go on that journey and learn about these things, so that you kind of know you can build a meter for yourself in the future. When are you going to near the line? When is crossing the line, right? And how can you be courteous and respectful to all people? And so if we're taking questions, I'm going to direct this one to you, Lazeric. What
Okay.
Black versus African-American in a professional setting in the workplace? So how do we handle that, right? Because not all Black people are African-American.
Exactly.
Not all African Americans like that term. It's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we approach that?
Well, I've moved to the point where I prefer the term Black, and I try to get people not to be afraid from it, because, again, when you think about it, the whole Black or the whole African American diaspora, there's people there's from Jamaica, there's from Haiti, there are people that have immigrated and moved from Africa to places in the UK or France. And so by just saying African American, you're limiting and you're making assumptions about a person's background from that way. And so for me, it feels safer and it feels better to where, I'm Black and I'm proud of that. There's so many different shades of that. There's so many different backgrounds with that. It's all encompassing. And so, just trying to get people to actually move and to understand that, hey, while you're making an assumption sometimes when you call people African American, but you don't lose anything when you actually say Black compared to that. Compared to that, and so just one of the things again of sort of paying attention to where it can actually come across as a microaggression sometimes, when automatically you get to the point to where you assume that just the every Black person actually is African American.
Ms. Ingrid, did that answer your question? Is that good?
Yes, thank you. It's interesting because in my generation, it was impolite to say Black. It was more polite to say African American, because it was actually focusing less on the color of skin and more on kind of an association of origin. So that's a difficult one to kind of shift, because whenever I say Black versus African American, I feel like I'm committing a microaggression versus actually not.
For me, it was one of the things that I had to think about sometimes, because I started to actually get to the point where I was using Latino interchangeably actually with Hispanic. And, I thought about it like, hey, I might be offending some people, because, the two aren't actually always used interchangeably, even if there might be some historical overlap between the two groups. And so, it's not something to where, again, with something like that, to where you can automatically use it interchangeably. And so I know that labels matter and names matter. And so sometimes with people to where the same with their pronouns, and sometimes they're pronouncing of names or what people prefer to be called, it's always a great practice just to ask people and just to see what they prefer and then go from that. And a lot of people actually do appreciate that, and it may be something to where they're startled a little bit. But if you sense that sometimes you ask that person a question, you explain a little bit of, hey, the reason I'm asking you this is because of that. It usually breaks down all people's defenses, and they usually become very appreciative because you're not trying to make assumptions, and you want to appreciate and interact with them on the terms that they want and how they want to be approached and addressed.
No, that makes sense. Thanks. And actually, Tom was just saying, and I think he's exactly right on this, that it'll be great to be able to get to a point where we don't actually have to label and group everybody at all. Because me being Indian, I never like it when people point out or ask me, because I never feel different until somebody puts me in a box. And then it kind of pisses me off. So I can imagine that everyone would feel that way. So I'm always hesitant to ask somebody a question because, again, you're making them feel different just inherently by asking the question.
Yeah, I can appreciate the perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think asking the question is definitely the route to go. It's always better to ask than not ask. People might be a little bit uncomfortable by the question, but it's better that they're a little uncomfortable versus very offended, And so that's what I always usually tell people, right? And actually, speaking of questions, right, Ray has a great question in the chat that they have ERGs at his employer, right? And so how do you suggest, Lazeric, that they position things, especially now that people are working from home? How do we keep those groups thriving?
Well, it's tough into where, it's something that I have to actually consider a lot for my job because, we haven't kicked off the creation of employee resource groups and business resource groups for people who may not know exactly what an ERG is, commonly called as a BRG as well. And so we haven't kicked those off as a part of our diversity and inclusion strategy yet, but we are creating them, but we still do have overall engagement activities. And so, as best as possible, try to find ways to connect with people using Zoom or other means. And so, Zoom burnout is real. It's something that's really happening to people. So trying to find other meaningful ways to actually engage with them, whether it's like, sometimes having a discussion feed going on the side of a Slack or, sharing with people good articles to actually read or a good interview or something to actually watch. Especially during times where we're having a lot of historical months, and those that came up during the last few months. And so if there's something where you can go out to where usually your group would get together and to celebrate some different historical month, but whether it's maybe something in May to where you're celebrating Asian Pacific Heritage Month, do something to actually go out and connect with one of those communities where it's visiting a museum together. That might be kind of hard to where we're in COVID, but, virtually taking a tour of a museum or an art exhibit of those histories. And so, some of the momentum is lost a little bit because you can't have that the interpersonal connection and camaraderie, but there are lots of ways that you can try to get as creative as possible to still engage and to still connect with people on those levels. And so to where virtual just make it a little bit more challenging, but, there are still great ways you can actually still be effective in operating those groups.
Ray, I hope that answered your question. And like I said in the chat, so we're going to transition a little bit. So our other speaker, Jamel, should be joining us in about 20, 30 minutes. But I wanted to hopefully get a chance to hear from some of y'all after I introduce. So everybody, please thank Lazeric. That was absolutely amazing and very, very, very informative. I hope everybody learned a lot. I know I did for sure. And so I just wanted to introduce, so now, right, this segment, what we really want to do is we're thinking about these things, right, thinking about microaggression, thinking about how to approach situations, right, when are people, going to be offended or that kind of thing, right, but I really just want to take this time for people to reflect on their actions in the past, up until this moment. And if there are times where you felt like you contributed to this culture, this microaggression culture, right, this culture of violence in this country. And I want all of y'all to think about that. And thankfully, I was approached by Bryce, and he is very gracious with for us to share his perspective and insight on a little bit about his experience with this question, and how he's kind of battled to move away from that mindset. So Bryce, I'll let you introduce yourself wherever you are, and then you can kind of take it away.
Yeah, Marcus, thanks for the introduction and putting this together. It's been like a experience, especially when I've only really time on the past month. So it's good introduction.
Did he freeze for everybody?
Yeah. Bryce, you're breaking up a bit. Do you want to try turning your video
Turn your
off?
video off. I'm trying to stop his video right now. I think he might be leaving.
I just got dropped off. Now I'm back on. Can you guys all hear me better now?
Yeah, we're all good.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I think it's been the media, the kind of discrimination this country is facing, and it's really, I think, the past few weeks, but even more so the past few years, as we've seeing the extremity and leadership in this country transform in such a negative direction. So I think that's really where, for me, it became, and that with me graduating, leaving the real world, into the and school. Time kind of reflect about my own past, and definitely someone who I grew up in definitely a privileged of Seattle, Washington. Attended private schools, grew up extremely sheltered, had great parents, but I wasn't put out into the world much. As I there, I think there's definitely a niche side of the school that fills that exact. I kind of filled right into that. Definitely aggressions and micro. Me, it was reflect on that. My microaggressions came from my own. I would say self. Self.
Bryce, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind turning your video off? Because we're still getting a really spotty connection.
Oh, sorry about that.
Or
No
potentially
worries.
moving closer to a router. That may be helpful too.
Is this? I could try calling in on my phone, or does that turning off the video help?
Turning the video seems to be helping. So let's try that.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry. Realizing that, two moms, I'd faced a lot of discrimination early on in life, and I think as I got older, and started aging more.
I lied. I think it's still definitely cutting in and out. Do you want to maybe try calling in on your phone? Ooh. Did we lose you? I'm gonna hope that he. Let me see. He said he's trying to call in, so hopefully that should work, and I should be able to get him. So when that ends up running back, we can allow him to finish. I'm really sorry, but what's a Zoom forum without some technical difficulties, right? That's to be expected, I suppose. I was actually really worried. I was on the phone with Spectrum all morning because they clipped our internet package without telling us. It was a whole mess, right? So we got that up and running, but we're waiting. Oh, there we go. All right. So it should be coming in right now. Bryce, are you here? Let me unmute. Bryce, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys. Yeah, I just called in on my phone. Hopefully, let me know if the connection's not working. I can try to move again, but sorry about the computer problems on that. But if you guys, I'm sorry, I know I kind of cut out there on the end of kind of at what point did I start cutting out?
Why don't you actually just start from the beginning? Why don't you just go the whole thing? Round 2 started from where?
Okay, yeah.
I think it was spotty the whole time.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that being spotty, guys. So anyway, yeah. So definitely, you know, like Marcus said, had been, you know, had the chance to reconnect with him. It's definitely been a reflective state, you know, over the past 2 weeks, as I was saying. I think even more so for me, it's kind of been, you know, a reflective state over a lot of my own, you know, mindset and thoughts over the past 2 years. Is, you know, the country's leadership is, you know, turned in a very negative direction, and in my opinion, and that's really kind of made me reflect on who I see myself as a person and kind of the direction, you know, I would really like to see, and especially I think seeing all of that negative energy, you know, created over the past 2 years and kind of coinciding with me leaving college and going out into the real world. So it's been, you know, a very reflective 2 years for me. And, you know, I think from my own experience, grew up up in Seattle, Washington, definitely a very, you know, it was a privileged background, as, you know, Lazeric had mentioned. You know, definitely a very, you know, I think I grew up with a lot of that privilege, you know, great parents and a great family, but it was very sheltered, you know, went to private school and didn't really see a lot of the world. And, you know, for me, you know, I think that coincided to definitely an overall unawareness, I think, you know, in high school, early years of college, of just being, you know, being in a sheltered place my whole life and starting to interact, you know, as you gain independence and interacting with the world more and facing the consequences of that kind of upbringing. And it, you know, I think it really took time and reflection and, you know, events, like I had said, to start to, you know, see that. And I think for me, a lot of it was a reflection on where these, you know, these, you know, microaggressions were coming from. And through that reflection, I think one thing that really kind of helped me, you know, see a path forward was, you know, I did grow up, like I said, up in Seattle, you know, did have, you know, a fairly sheltered upbringing, but, you know, I had 2 moms, and I faced, you know, a lot of discrimination with that when I was really young. And as the world, you know, LGBT movement has, you know, exploded in a great way, especially over the past 10, 12 years. The world's become very, very, very accepting. You know, it was a lot different having 2 moms when I was 5, 15 years, you know, 18 years ago than it was when I was 13, 10 years ago. And so I think a lot of that internalized into myself as a self-consciousness from young, and I turned that kind of self-confidence and the microaggressions that I had taken, and I kind of used, you know, tried to push back against them through my own, which is something I think I really had to call myself into and say, look, you know, you're not helping anyone by trying to protect yourself from your own self-consciousness. I think it's more about, you know, understanding kind of that, you know, one, as, you know, it's been mentioned a lot in the call already today, you know, it doesn't more about coming all together and, you know, not making discriminatory or judgmental actions on anyone based on any multitude of factors. And so I think it, for me, was realizing I was taking a lot of that old past negativeness that I'd kind of internalized in myself and using other microaggressions to, you know, push myself up, make myself feel better from my own insecurities. And so it was kind of realizing that and making a change of direction where I think, you know, I've been really trying to move away from that, get more involved in the community, express myself more into the world. And so, you know, I was really, you know, happy to be able to join the call today and happy to be able to kind of share that small piece. You know, very sure if Marcus has, you know, more questions or if anyone else in the group has more questions, happy to share. But I think that's kind of a quick introduction.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess my follow-up question, right? So like you're talking about in these instances where you felt like your inherent insecurities was like pushing you to try and use putting other people down to like make yourself feel better. But I genuinely would like to know, like in those moments, did you feel like you were actually hurting people? Did you register that that's what was happening with the people on the other end, whether they even, you know, were present in that moment or people after the fact, right, could be hurt by those actions? In that moment, were you thinking about that?
Yeah, you know, I don't think I was in the moment. I think it was almost habitual, I would say. I think it's hard to think back to where, you know, I started to, you know, maybe have these thoughts of bringing other people down to, you know, bring myself up in a sense. That was and at that point, no, I think I don't ever really think of it when I was going throughout it. My intention was, I think it was more of a protective measure for myself than it was to be used as a I wasn't thinking, oh, I want to hurt these people. I think it was more for me, oh, I want to make myself feel better, which is an inherently selfish thing and is, wrong and immature. But in the moment, I think that's kind of where my thought process was at with thinking, in microaggressions and thinking in ways of, stereotypes and discrimination in that sense. So I think it was for me more of a protective measure, and also even more so just a habitual measure of growing up around it, seeing it. And so I think that was more it in the moment. Obviously, in reflection, it's clear, actions are hurtful and they can be extremely hurtful, and you can't go back and change them no matter how bad you want to. But I think for me, and, I would assume, I have a lot of peers that, a good amount of peers that have, I think, had somewhat similar experiences, and I would assume it would be a kind of a similar response by them. I'm not sure, but that would be my assumption.
Yeah, I think that's very self-aware to be able to say that, like, going back in like those moments, you definitely didn't necessarily like feel that you were making any sort of like negative impact, right? But like, I'm curious, right? So we've now moved beyond that. Like you've said that you've been trying to move away from that line of thought, right? And so has that come mostly from like reduction in like your own self-conscious, right? And you just feel like you have to put people down less to make yourself feel better? Or is it more a genuine kind of journey to understand, right, the plight of the other people?
Yeah, I think it's, I think it's kind of a synergy of the two in a sense, but more heavily weighted on the second, where I think as I've been as I've been able to, attempt to gain more of an understanding of, different movements, and, it's like I had mentioned, growing up with two moms and facing that form of discrimination was, I think it was a valuable perspective at the time now. And I think it paid side effects, but, being able to see, I love my parents, and I always been a vivid, avid supporter of the LGBTQ movement. And, drawing, okay, well, that's something that I have a personal relationship with. I had personal experiences with it. So it's very easy to draw myself to that. But then realizing, okay, a lot of these movements, they're all extraordinarily different. But at the end of the day, they all come down to equal rights, and, people should be treated equally. And so to try to kind of find, that, to be able to see that all of these movements have equal value, and, some more extreme and others at different times. The LGBTQ movements, really, it still has a lot of serious problems, but it's definitely moved in a different direction. And it's not like you're seeing, the kind of violence or anything that you're seeing against, the African-American community right now. So I think it's, but it's drawing focus on, it's kind of we're all in this together type of thing, and trying to gain more understanding and trying to become more familiar with and understand more. So I think I would say more the second, but kind of a synergy of the two at the same time.
So I definitely think that that's kind of how it would go, right? Like I actually really like that kind of strategy, right? For everybody, right? Taking something that you have a personal relationship with, a personal connection with, and using that to find a commonality with the struggle that we're facing, in America today. If we're thinking about, oh, I am an LGBTQ person, right? But I'm a white LGBTQ person. A lot of people in that situation, aren't thinking about the differences between being a white LGBT person and a black LGBTQ person, right? And if you can empathize with the struggle for LGBTQ rights, you can definitely empathize with the struggle for black rights and black trans rights and black everything rights, right? Because at a certain point in history, you were also denied those rights. So using that as a transition, right, to start to understand the other perspective a little bit better. And, the next question I want to ask, I kind of want to have this really be like the introduction to the, give me one sec. So the other speaker is actually just messaging me asking for the link. So I'm going to share it with him, and I believe we'll be transitioning into his segment too. But I wanted to just say thank you to Bryce for sharing that insight with us. And, to be honest, like in the spirit of honesty, this is called Honesty Hour. We met in a very different circumstance, right? I was pledging a fraternity, and Bryce was in that fraternity, and I happened to, witness some of these things that he, and not just him by any means, that a lot of the brothers in this particular house were doing, right? All the time, saying things, doing things, whatever it may be, right? And that always, it came to a head at a certain point. It came to a head, and we had a very, admittedly not great interaction, right? But Bryce actually circled back, reached out to me literally 4 years later, an entire 4 years and then some, or 3 years and then some later, and reached out to me, and we talked, and I invited him to come on this Zoom, right? Because I feel like, I am a forgiving person. Like I really genuinely do believe that if people deserve a second chance, that we should give it to them, right? And he should, in his few minutes that he did explain to me like his whole journey, right? I truly wanted him to be able to share that with you all and people who are just starting out, really thinking like, wow, I've been hearing a lot about how bad I've been doing or how everything that white people do is terrible, right? Is there anything positive that's going to come from this, right? Is there any way that I can even ever imagine having Black friends? I don't know if those are the thoughts that white people think. I'm not white, but I don't know if that's what you may be thinking, but I definitely would empathize with that. The media is very angry at white people right now, as they should be. And I know it's hard to not feel personal, to feel personally attacked in that situation. But like at the end of the day, all you can do is your best. And if right now is better late than never, I commend Bryce for coming on this call and speaking with all of you. And I definitely wanted to say thank you to him and thank you to Lazeric once again. But I believe Jamel just joined the call. So
yes, I'm here.
You're here. That's fantastic. Yeah. Where you at? Let me go on speaker view so I can see you. All right. So we were originally gonna do this at the beginning, but we'll do it now. So Jamel is our other fantastic guest speaker. He is a bilingual rapper, VR artist, and all in all revolutionary. His work with the whole activism scene has been featured most recently in New York Times as a member of one of New York's protest leaders in recent days. He's been spending his time with the people, by the people, for the people, touting the truths. So I'm super, super glad and very honored to have him here with us today to talk to all of you. So I just would like to ask Jamel, why don't you introduce yourself? Why are you fighting the good fight? What happened, man? Like, what brought you to where you're at today?
Can everybody hear me all right? Does that work? Can you hear me through the mic?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
All right. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
We can hear you.
Awesome. So right now, I'm actually in the streets right now in Washington, D.C. Today is actually Donald Trump's birthday. And so with Refuse Fascism, there are a lot of questions about where this thing should go. And this movement of anything, if after all of this, if like in Ferguson, after 6 years, all that happens is that we elect another Black mayor or get just another Black or a person of color in a place of leadership, but actually don't eliminate the source of the problem, if we don't actually eliminate the fact that Black and brown young people keep getting murdered by the system every day, then we actually aren't going to solve the problem. And so we're here to actually talk about what it's going to take to get to that world, and frankly, confronting the fascists that's in the White House, that none of these reforms are going to make any sense or going to cause a dent in at all if we don't actually do something about it. And so, I really appreciate this grouping and you inviting me to come to this and to be a part of this program as somebody who first came to this work as, I started studying Chinese in high school and went to a public middle school in Washington, D.C., my hometown, and then a private high school. And all part of that experience was both feeling like a fish out of water in Chinese class and then a fish out of water in these, like private institutions where suddenly I was being targeted by police at friends' houses or in their neighborhoods or being stopped and frisked and harassed. And this was like normal, and learning to kind of accept that growing up. And then I know there was a particular story about, in 2008, I received a Fulbright to study hip hop in China. And before that incident, I was actually in Boston and was, after going to a party in Boston, this is after graduation, I was actually assaulted by Boston police officers. And my thinking was like, look, you guys don't know me. and I've been investigated by the State Department. I've got a Fulbright coming up. You guys actually have no idea who you're fucking with. And I go over to them, and I basically get a letter from the State Department the next day saying your grant is in jeopardy until you actually explain what happened. It looks like you had a run-in with the law. And so this is a real kind of focal point and piece of learning for me to find out that this was really all like a system, and not just, individual actors or bad actors. And so from somebody that comes to that work as like that experience in high school, the experience of dealing with, Boston police in college and almost having my Fulbright scholarship, revoked on that basis. And then on that basis, actually becoming a revolutionary and an emancipator of humanity, taking on stop and frisk in New York, and, finding the connection systemically to be able to take on fascism today. So that is in a nutshell kind of what brings me to the work and what informs my work as far as when it comes to, activism.
So that's a fantastic introduction, and I think a lot of people are really, really shocked at that story, when they hear it for the first. I know I was shocked when I heard it from the first time when I interviewed you some time ago, because like it's a very similar thing. Like I said, a very similar thing happened to me in high school, and this is an entire systemic issue, but I'd really love to hear, what is the work? What is the work? What do you do with Refuse Fascism? How do we get people to organize? How do we get people to make a change, make a difference? What does that process actually look like?
So, I think it's a really good question. And a lot of people are asking what they should be doing now. And I know the topic of this question is around a lot of like racial microaggressions and things like that. And it's interesting because the reaction of society for a lot of these things ends up being like, there was this great outrage that happened against, Black and brown people where, a Black person was gunned down or a Black person was murdered by police, and a lot of people will think, well, this is a real good time for me to challenge my racial assumptions, but let's take that logic all the way out to where it ends. Like if the end of this process is just really only working on oneself or like, frankly, joining a book club and learning some more things about the history of Black people, that's actually not what the result of this should be. So this question of what is doing the work, yes, it's important for people to work on their own aggressions, microaggressions, but all those exist in the context of systemic racism that actually goes to the history of this country, which has been founded on slavery and genocide. So the work is actually fighting against that, and through that process, people will work on themselves. They'll have their ideas challenged. They'll have to think about what program is actually going to lead us to actually ending oppression for Black and brown people and ending oppression for all people. Is voting something that is actually a program that will allow you to get there? The work is actually wrangling those ideas and bringing people together in that and on that basis. And so with Refuse Fascism, we're working, with people from all different types, people who have voted for Bernie, people who vote for Hillary, people who, like myself, don't believe in voting and think you actually need a revolution to undo this system. We're with, to faith leaders, right? It's actually about bringing all those people right now and actually really confronting the fascist threat that we have in the White House and looking that straight in the eye for what it is. This is the dude who during a pandemic told you to go, that is so anti-science, told you to go drink bleach during a fucking pandemic, right? This is the guy who said that Henry Ford has good bloodlines and that Nazis are fine people and that wanted to hold a white power rally on Juneteenth. Make no mistakes about like the direct line between the Confederacy and, Trump being the second president of the Confederacy, and the fact that you actually will have to you'll actually have to drive that out. And that won't be something you can actually like vote out. But the work is actually bringing people together to fight and to do that. But I really want to make that distinction around like versus the work being primarily self-work and learning how to unpack one's own racism, which yes is important, but that takes place in the larger context of the world.
Okay, so let's say a bunch of these people right here are already on that process of like self-learning. They have that part down, they have the resources, they've been reading, they've been doing the educating yourself part, right? So if they're ready to go, right, where do they go? What is the next step, right? How do you fight the system? Where do you show up? Who do you call? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. I mean, I think you can think about it a lot like, you know, people have made the analogy of the police, right, to slave catchers, and the correct historical analogy. That's actually what they come from. You know, the Fugitive Slave Act and federal marshals, you know.
Yeah,
and so, like, this thing of, you know, what is it going to take to get us there? So much defines, you know, how you're defining the problem completely defines how you're going to define the solution, you know. And if folks want to dig into the solution for how humanity can get free, like, people need to investigate a revolutionary leader named Bob Avakian. You probably haven't heard about him, from the 60s, you know, who actually, you know, came forward with the Panthers, but is someone who actually didn't give up on revolution and found, you know, was able to actually, like, make strategic breakthroughs on, you know, both summing up the experience of revolutionary China, what went well, what things actually they did wrong, where there were excesses, and then actually being able to figure out how in this country, in the imperialist United States, like, how you would make a revolution in a country like this, and what a new socialist Republic of North America might look like. And so for people who are ready to kind of do the work, and, like, in terms of looking at what it would take to actually get to a world free of oppression versus how do I unpack my, you know, racist microaggressions, or how do I learn more about the history of the history of racism within this country, which is important, but learning about the history in and of itself doesn't actually prepare you to confront those structures. It doesn't, or nor does it actually give you the tools. But people can check out, you know, Bob Avakian, they can check out the Revolution Club, they can check out at the RevComs and the Revolution Nothing Less show on YouTube. And then around this broad coalition around fighting fascism, folks can get connected with Refuse Fascism at refusefascism.org. You know, you can check out folks like Centaur Taylor or Carl Dix, both who are, you know, initiators of Refuse Fascism, and follow them on Instagram and on Twitter. And, you know, and we're calling for people to step out broadly on, like, Juneteenth, you know, in the face of these very, like, white nationalist attacks. So those are some, like, in terms of immediate things that people can look at, and, you know, if you're saying, like, quote unquote, ready to do the work. But I do really want to make that distinction on, you know, it's as if during slavery, after Emmett Till, after slavery, during Emmett Till, if the reaction to people then was to say, you know, after seeing Emmett Till in his body, you know, lynched by, you know, white men who accused him of whistling at a white girl, and who actually sold the story at a time that they were lying the entire time, right? You know, if the reaction for that was just for, you know, white people, black people to just start more book clubs about learning the history of racism in the country, that would have been important, but it actually would not have gotten to solving the problem, right? You know, for slavery to end, it took more than people just learning about the horrors of slavery. And frankly, for the rights of black people to be defended in the South, it actually took federal troops from the North. It actually took state power. And so I think we society, as a society, individually and collectively, we actually have to confront what that's going to take. But those are some sources to, you know, to get started with. You know, other, you know, sources in terms of, like, the history of the United States. Colson Whitehead is a great, like, fiction author that really goes into, like, writes some great stuff on, like, the history of the country, especially when it pertains to black people. And if folks haven't checked out, like, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, that's a pretty foundational work for understanding, like, mass incarceration right now as it exists. Again, all these things are great exposure.
Yeah, so we have a living document. For those of you that weren't at the last meeting, we have a living document with all these resources, and I'm about to import all these right after this meeting. Y'all can check out. We'll have links directly to the Refuse Fascism website, to all these various, like, to Colson Whitehead's personal website where he's got books there, and then we have all the book lists, all the movies, right, all that. And I really want to reiterate Jamel's point that right now is, you know, you can have that personal reflection time, that personal time of knowing that you're really reading up, you're educating yourself, you're arming yourself with the power of knowledge to take on people that you need to take on, right? And so actually, Jamel, I wanted to ask you another question, right? So what about working within the system, working with local representatives, working with political offices, right? What's your stance on that? Do you say screw all that, screw the whole system, work completely around it, right, to tear the whole shit down? Or do you say, is there some validity in badgering and calling and emailing, in mass droves, your local representatives to try and change district legislation or those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'd put it, to you and to everybody on this chat about like a real challenge about what it would take to actually solve the problem. And is that something that is actually available within the realm of electoral politics? Do you get a vote on police murder or police brutality? Is it just a matter of the representation of different people who are there? Do we just need more black mayors? Like, we had a black president, yet police murder continued at the same rate or trajectory, right? Still 2.5 people, young men, young black or brown people being, killed per day. So it's, I think we actually have to really be like, we have to actually really confront what it's going to take to solve it. And then on that basis, we should answer the tough questions. I think on that basis, there is a real question around like, in what way and how does fundamental change come through electoral politics, right? And like major changes, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, the right to vote. These were not things that actually, you didn't win the right to vote through voting, right? It was actually people on the streets en masse. And we actually have seen also examples of this all throughout last year in places like Hong Kong and Puerto Rico, where people on the streets day after day, night after night, well, that's actually made the difference. And I think, they've driven out hated regimes, 18 days for Mubarak in Egypt, 6 months in South Korea. I think the additional thing to this is in this period, it just is also like, we've seen like, I guess this rebellion has been going on for 18 days. And in 18 days, we've seen more change than we've seen in the past 18 years around the issue of like, mass incarceration and the new Jim Crow. And that's not because, politicians felt badgered. That's because like people were out on the streets and the terms were reset. And then within that, yeah, politicians, representatives of the system are going to have to figure out what they're going to do in relation to that. But the terms actually have to be set by a different force in society. And so I think that's a bit more of where I'm coming from. And so I work with people from all different types. If folks are going to go vote, go vote. But sure. But if you vote there and then stop, well, that's a problem. Or if you vote there and then think, and if you vote and then are doing so without actually confronting what it's going to take to actually end this, then again, it's like, what do you actually end up furthering? But the same system that continues to go on and do this.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. And I think Lazeric he was our other guest that spoke a little bit earlier, right? Riot and protest have always been the voice of the voiceless, the voice of the unheard, right? And change really only has come about through agitation, right? Through violence is how we get the attention of these administrators, of people in power to make these real decisions. But I want to ask both of y'all, actually, what are your perceptions of the protests around the country, and how has the rhetoric circulating around, if we think of the prime example is our fascist president, focusing on the rioting and the looting, when most of those people were coming in to undermine the actual mission of the protest in general, right? How do you, what is how do you feel about that? Do you feel that is undermining the goal of the protest, calling attention to which is obviously calling attention to the police brutality and the perpetuation of the denial of rights to Americans, right? Do you feel like the media is spinning it into something that's distracting from the actual force, that are marching in the streets?
Well, I believe that it is, and I'm a huge believer of never letting somebody else control and define your narrative. And that's one of the exceptionally powerful things about social media right now, is regardless of how mainstream media or, like Fox News or the person in the president's office right now tries to control and shift those things, is to where we have the power now to redirect our narrative and say that, no, we know that some of these people out there looting, and some of those agitators are out there are only trying to bring negative light to the protest and detract from the real message. And so that's where we can't let those things happen. We have to continue to push out there the positive message, continues to let people know why exactly the protests and riots are actually going on and why people are feeling that it's frustrated. It helps you see how companies are responding to where, any one of them can actually put out messages, but, forcing them to make donations, forcing them to change their hiring practices, forcing them to change their strategy and how they come about has been a direct result of protesting and calling people out and holding them accountable. And so, yeah, there's been some initial results. And so the burden on us now is not to become complacent with the change and what we've had now, and to make sure that it continues and goes further to the point to where, leadership actually reflects what the leaders want. We know that, sometimes to where vote isn't actually always the way, it doesn't yield the results that we always want to, but it's one mechanism. And we saw what protests and agitation brings if it's something to where people can actually stick with it and continue on to it and keep that momentum going past the big mainstream news cycles.
Jamel, do you want to hop in on that?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, I think this thing around like good protester, bad protester, like, look, it's a similar and the exact same battle plan and strategy of divide and conquer that they run and ran on people during the 60s, and that they run, outside agitators. This is like straight up Bull Connors language for, when young people from different states went to places like Greensboro, North Carolina to go forcibly integrate them, he called those people outside agitators, right? And so it's like, this is the same tired, we need outside agitators. Like we're taking applications for outside agitators, right? And, they'll talk about the violence of like, quote unquote, looters, like, as if, when Freddie Gray was murdered in Baltimore, they would talk about, and President Obama called people in Baltimore who righteously rebelled thugs and looters and who are causing violence, as if you can equivocate the violence or of having your spine smashed as a human being to like a broken window on a police car or burnt out police cars. There's no comparison. You want to talk about like the violence and brutality that upholds this system that kills 2.5 black or brown people per day. Another one on Friday, just in Atlanta, right? In the midst of these protests. They actually do, like, their system is upheld through untold violence that they never have to speak for, But the moment that protesters start to rise up or people start to rise up, there's always accusations or assertions of violence or trying to divide people out between good protesters or bad protesters, looters, or violent protesters. I mean, you want to talk about looting? Like, this is a country that was founded on the looting of an entire continent and the genocide of an entire peoples. Like, are we really talking about looting? Like, about fucking Target, my guy? Like, let's actually get really granular with it. It's not a game that folks should fall for. And it's, this thing of like, it occupies a space of like respectability politics within protesting that actually we don't have room for. The enemy, I will gladly stand with you shoulder to shoulder, right? To actually fight against injustice. As long as that's what we're fighting against. Like, we have to be focused on solving the problem and creating a world where Black and brown people don't have to have the fear that they'll be gunned down by those who protect them, at a minimum. We actually have to create a world where they're worthy of lives, where they're living lives worthy of human beings. Like, that's actually what it takes.
I just want to dwell on that last point for a second, just because it seems to be some sort of confusion that the, people who are coming out as condemners of the protests, or people that are coming out, condemning the violence or the looting, right? And that are coming from a place without understanding, right? This is, even if you are an 18-year-old Black person, the chances of you experiencing violence against you are astronomical by the time you reach 18. By the time you reach 16, right, it's almost inevitable, if not inevitable, that you've had it time and time and time again, right? If you live an entire life where the whole world feels like it's against you, you're obviously going to harbor a lot of anger, and that anger has to go somewhere. You know what I mean? So for people that don't understand why people are angry, right? We can talk about it in historical terms with slavery and Jim Crow and Emmett Till and all that, right? But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about right now. Your children, for those of you that are parents out here, right? Your grandchildren, for those of you that will become grandparents, in the future. What you have to ask yourself, like, do you want them to live in a world where everybody can feel safe? Because right now, that is not the situation. And that's why we're angry. If I have to walk out of my house every single day and fear that I can't do normal actions without being in danger of violence against me, right? I'm going to be pretty upset about that, especially when I see my brothers, Black and brown brothers, every single day being gunned down in the streets, beat up in the streets by cops, right? Arrested unjustly. You know what I'm saying? That is the fury, the fire. That is the fury that fuels the fire, right? And it comes out as literal fire sometimes in the riots, in the looting, right? And for people that are sitting in positions of power, or older white people, or just white people in general, to sit there and point fingers and say, you're doing a bad thing by destroying property, right? How about you all need to take a step back, think about what might be making these people angry, right? Think about why these people may be taking these very drastic actions, and think about how real systemic change could stop those actions and how you can contribute to that real systemic change, right? Don't point fingers at the people breaking the windows. Point fingers at yourself, at the systems that you have supported throughout your life, right? That are making these actions more difficult, for people. Take the time to look in the mirror instead of just pointing fingers all the time. That's all I got to say on that point. And I think that there is a interesting, dialogue that I've had with a lot of people who work in DC specifically, with congressional staffers specifically, that always say, the law is the root of change, right? And I would just like to ask both of you, Jamel and Lazeric, what do you think of that statement when people tell you that stuff?
Well, I think that's kind of it's kind of frustrating, because when you think about it, like we have people who's supposed to enforce and upkeep the law who do it with a high level of bias and discrimination, to where people that they feel threatened by and intimidated by, trained professionals, overreact and feel that their life are in danger when it comes to Black and brown people, and they're being executed on the spot. But you see in similar situations to where people that remind them of themselves and look a lot like them are able to do things to where they're able to be let go with a warning, or arrested and taken into custody. So when it comes to saying that the law is supposed to do things, the law is supposed to protect people and all citizens. And when a law feels corrupt, or if it feels outdated, then it's time to actually change. When the people who are trying to upkeep it and trying to live into it are victims of the law.
Definitely. I'm not sure if Jamel popped out.
No, I'm here.
All right, we're. Yeah, if you want to speak on that, if obviously you don't have to if you don't want to, but if you want to speak on that, just the idea that like the laws, fundamental laws.
No, man, I'd love to speak on all of it. I think just very briefly, I think, again, we have to look at the law. We have to look at the law and order, and reflection to to class society and what kind of society that we're actually in. And the laws, the state security forces that protect those laws, that protect, they're in relationship to that society, right? So like the police in and of themselves don't protect the people. They don't protect or uphold the Constitution or the law, right? I mean, the Constitution was founded, it enshrines slavery. It is actually a slave master's constitution and document. And so to be looking towards that for any kind of semblance of freedom is like, we need something new than that, What the role of the police in society is actually not to protect the people, it's to protect the system that enforces exploitative relations among the people. And, that's what it does. That's why when people get out of line, when protests happen, especially anti-police brutality protests, why do you think it's met with such intense police brutality? This is actually, why during these uprisings, why do you have, armed guards that are patrolling Macy's, standing out in force in Macy's or downtown department stores? It's actually about ensuring both the property relations and the actual relationships, the relations of exploitation between people. Why do you think, police patrol and control different neighborhoods and the people that go in and out of them, right? This is a part of like actually what the police do to protect and serve the system, right? This system, it actually has no future for Black and brown young people. And that's not because they just don't.
Jamel, I don't know if anybody else, but I can't actually hear you.
Yo, Jamel, they can't hear you. Hello?
Can you check your connection? It might be that something popped out on your connection. I can't hear you.
Take the Bluetooth off. Yes, it's connecting to the phone.
Now he's on mute. Now you're on mute if he's still talking. Ooh. Don't know. Yikes. Well, on that note, I would like to spin it back to Lazeric, because that's a fantastic point. Private prisons and the prison industrial complex and its role in making sure that people maintain the laws, the discriminatory laws that they have put in place so far.
Yeah, when you think about it, when you can privatize prisons, it becomes big business, and they wouldn't build those unless they actually knew that they can make money off of it. And so how do you actually get people inside of the prisons? And one of the interesting things that happens is you think about the marijuana business, to where, people used to be locked up, especially at disproportionate rates of Black and brown people, but now people selling marijuanas are regarded as huge entrepreneurs. And so I'm wondering now, to where when you're decriminalizing marijuana in the Sullivan, and that was something to where so many people are locked up for now. How are people now going to fill these big private prisons and the industrialized prison system? And what's going to be the new shift over there now to overly punish and police certain groups and people?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a big portion of it. And I know we got kind of all caught up in a lot of like high level stuff. It was fantastic that Jamel came on and really took it in that direction. I think it's the conversation that we need to have, right? Asking the hard questions about what is the ultimate end goal. And I think the ultimate end goal needs to be a set of directed targets, right? People need to come together, and say that we need a directed target that says, the civil rights movement in the 60s, I always talk about, right? It was suffrage. They just wanted to be able to vote, right? Like that was their fundamental core, they wanted a civil right, a basic, human right, you know what I mean? And right now we're being denied a lot of rights, but it's a lot of very differing situations all across the country. It seems very jumbled, right? People are angry, but they're angry about different things. In some communities, they may be angry about unjust policing. In some communities, they may be angry because that nobody can rent apartments because the landlords have been forcing people out and not honoring different rental contracts because of people's race, right? They might be angry because they grew up in a really white community, right? And they've faced a lot of microaggressions in their lifetime, right? They're angry for a whole long set of reasons, right? But if we have a bunch of disparate, non-cohesive groups, right, that's not necessarily going to reach an ultimate conclusion, right? And so what I think, and this is just me telling y'all what I personally feel, is that we need a list, a whole ass real list of things that needs to be changed. And we need, and this may sound insane, but we need a white president or leader or somebody to tell the other white people that these are the things that need to change. Because no matter what, if it is Obama or any other Black politician, Cory Booker, any of these people, right, bringing on this legislation, A, it becomes a burden on that person, and they have to be the sole mouth for an entire group of millions of people, and B, people are automatically going to disrespect that person. They're automatically going to disregard that person, And I just genuinely feel like the angry white man is going to get a lot more done than the angry black man, because that angry white man has the credibility with the other white people. And that's just
that's also a part of people recognizing their privilege and being an ally and understanding the position that they are in to actually make change. And so when I'm talking with people, when I educate a lot of people about privileges, I try to get them to understand that, hey, it isn't something that you asked to be born with, but you actually are in a privileged position for that. And considering the idea of empathy and altruism, that unselfish concern of the welfare of others, you're in a position to where people are listening with you, and no matter your role, you can begin to make change. Sometimes it's at that big high level like politicians. Other times it's at grassroots levels to where you're making changes in your community and the people that you get a chance to interact with. So it's everybody choosing to exercise and use their privilege and not just waiting on exactly politicians to actually do that. That's how you get to the point where politicians eventually do represent the people, when you're doing things at the grassroots level and you're acting to make change in your everyday life. And so it's just basically everybody recognizing the privilege and trying to be an ally and to help advance the cause that way.
Yeah, I think that's another fantastic point, right? We're talking about grassroots, and that's actually what I think I wanna kind of end this whole discussion on, is like Jamel was talking about. It starts with the people, right? It's about people in the streets. Lazeric was mentioning a similar thing, right? It's about your own conscious decision of how you act to other people, where you spend your time, what you spend your time doing. Is it investing in the community? Is it making the world a better place, right? Is it making other people feel as included and loved as you make, your family feel or your best friends feel, right? Do you do everything in your power? And this is a question, an actual direct question to all of you. Do you feel like you do everything in your direct power to make the world a better place every time you step out of it? And that may not be, just being nice to everybody. That's whatever, right? But it may be every single day stepping out of your house, knowing that you're going to fight for what's right. Fight for that justice, to go out in the streets, hold up that sign, hold that megaphone, right?
Those are phones that can be charging.
Speak on it, repost the things that you want to repost to the social media echo chamber. That's fine and good or whatever, right? But every single day, leave your house with the intention of making the world a better place, a more comfortable place, a safer place for everybody to live in. And it will turn out that way, right? If we're all bought in on that ideal, if we're all bought in, truly bought in on the idea that everybody deserves the basic right to feel safe in their community, to have the same access to education as somebody else, to make sure that their kids are taken care of when they die, or that the system will not actively work to keep those children away from necessary funds, that kind of thing, right? Are you doing your best? That's all I want to leave y'all with. That question, ponder it. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time left, and I know a lot of people got places to go, and it's getting a little late on the East Coast, but I just really wanted to have a couple summation points ending, just to reiterate, right? Make sure we know what we're fighting for, to echo Jamel's sentiment. Make sure that we're fighting, but we're fighting for the right thing. And to Lazeric's sentiment, make sure that we're asking questions before we're judging. Ask questions before making a final judgment, and your world will become a lot brighter. I promise you. I promise you. Thirdly, I am a big fan of arming yourself with research. Professor Schwartz mentioned it last time. I'm going to update our living document of resources that y'all may have forgotten about and resend it out to everybody everywhere. I'm going to put it in that Facebook event group. I'll put it on my own personal whatever. But please, 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 it will have everything from everything from Refuse Fascism to Stand Up to Racial Justice, all of the books, all of the movies, all the podcasts, anything you could possibly need will be there. Arm yourself with the knowledge and then take the action when the actions present itself. Mob in the streets, obviously it's COVID, be careful. But if that's what it's going to take, that's what it's going to take. You know what I mean? So let's fight for what's right every single day with our own basic actions to each other. Show kindness and love to one another, because that's what we all deserve. And when it really boils down, dollars to donuts, be ready to fight the good fight when it comes to your doorstep. You know what I'm saying? So I want to say thank you to all of you who stayed through to the end. I know this is a little bit grueling with the technical difficulties and getting people on phones and calling in and this and that. But thank you to everyone who decided to show out. And I know this one was a lot more listening focused than the last one was a lot more speaking focused. But stay tuned for the third information about the third session. It's going to be a little bit of a transition, but staying on the same kind of topic, right? Like, we want to talk about this culture of violence. It's obviously great, but what I want to talk about for the next session is Black excellence, and why Black excellence is being, the idea of Black excellence is so scary to some people, and I want to celebrate that Black excellence any way that I can, right? And so hopefully the next one will be a lot more positive. So that'll be much, easier to digest, hopefully, because this one was pretty heavy. I encourage you to share this recording with anyone and everyone who you think is interested. Please send me feedback. I'm going to send out some surveys to everybody I have actual contact info for. Just let me know what you want to hear. Let me know what you want to talk about. This should be a conversation. And I really, really appreciate. Thank you again to our guests, Lazeric and Jamel. Jephthah couldn't be here today because he was sick. It was really unfortunate. Bryce, if you're still here, thank you to you. And then again, thank you to everybody that participated. I'm going to shut it down. And that'll be the end of the recording.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you all.